Hello again, everyone. I'm back with another Advanced Wars by Web Global League game. I want to show this one because, besides being one of my toughest matches, I think it was quite unusual also for a fog match because it was a very defensive kind of map with a lot of walling going on, which is usually seen more outside of fog games. So it came down a lot to formations, which I'd like to talk about. This one I played quite a few months ago. I haven't really done much Global League in a while now. One reason for which is that there are too many maps like this, unfortunately. Now, I like the idea of this map very much. I like landers, I like being able to play with transports, but the map has a really big second player advantage. I think at the time I played this map, it was something like 55% to 45% in player 2's favor, and when I last played Global League, about half the fog maps were that lopsided, and that just to me is not very fun, so I thought I would take a hiatus from Global League play until hopefully get some better maps in the rotation in a couple of months here. In any case, an interesting map, and it was fun to play one that was quite new in the rotation at that point and had almost no plays on it at the time I started this. My opponent is a pretty formidable one, named Mr. Moo395. I watched a few of Mr. Moo replays and realized that he's quite good, but also, I would say, fairly predictable. So having watched a few of those replays, I thought I was able to formulate a strategy that would counter what I expected Mr. Moo to be doing. Now, unfortunately, like almost all of my Global League maps, this one turned out to be Tier 2. So, once again, I was left with the choice of basically Olaf, Max, or Eagle. On this map, Eagle is a no-go. It's pretty obvious, I think, at first glance that the airport is locked off in a spot that's really hard to get to, and makes it so that copters can't come out fast and are really predictable. Eagle does terribly here, and Drake does great. If Eagle is out, that basically just leaves Max and Olaf. And I thought, with these pipes here, I think artillery will be very, very good. There are quite a few useful choke points you can use to build walls. It's going to be a very stally kind of map. So, Olaf struck me as the best bet out of those two options, which is unfortunate because, as I've said before, I don't like Olaf. My opponent perhaps thought the same thing and also picked Olaf, so we got the most boring of all possible matchups, Olaf versus Olaf. So, there is really nothing to talk about when it comes to the COs here. You can't even really wall break easily with Winter Fury because there are no comm towers, and so even an Olaf tank during Winter Fury attacking an 80 speed infantry on a plane can't wall break it reliably. Speaking of no comm towers, the map in general I think leads to a lot of defensive or stally play. The pipes contribute to that, this little one space wide sea contributes to that. You can build a 3-tile wide infantry wall here that's hard to break, or wall up at this little choke point here between the pipe and the sea. All of that makes it so that only the middle of the map, where there's not much to fight over, is open and dynamic. So with no CO differences, to give somebody an advantage in either the early game or the late game, this is going to come down mostly to better prediction, better formations, and his hefty advantages from being player 2 on this map. Player 2 can have it all on this map. Player 1 needs to make a choice. Do you delay capturing the port to go for the base, or do you delay capturing the city to go for the base? So player 2 gets started more efficiently, but the advantage only grows from there. Because the turn the lander returns, it'll then be able to pick up 2 new people very efficiently and drop them off for player 2, whereas for player 1 you're still once again stuck with inefficient choices. Player 2 has the option to drop off vehicles and infantry super fast, deep into the left side, and claim a lot of what probably should be player 1's territory. Player 1 can't do that as well. So player 2 is not just an economic but a military advantage as well, and more options in general. That, I think, is why player 2 has such a big win rate advantage, at least in the early days of this map, before player 1's caught on. So, as I said, he gets his elegant double capture there, and next turn can drop off 2 infantry at a time if he wants to. Now, I think I know how Mr. Moo will play, and I formulated my strategy accordingly. Mr. Moo always opens with a tank on his strong side, focuses quite heavily on that strong side, and generally plays quite conservatively on it. If he doesn't see a target, he tends to just sit tight in woods, not on cities, in woods in particular. Meanwhile, his weak side usually has almost nothing on it, so I am quite confident that Mr. Moo will build a turn 4 tank on his left side. Then it's a question of whether or not he lander drops it or just drives it straight forward. Either way, if he sees no target, I expect him to put it into the forest near the pipe. And that's a powerful move, and I really can't do much about it, because I just can't deploy as fast as he can. He could pretty quickly build up in that area and just deny me the entire left front for the whole game, costing me the match. I think I must do an aggressive lander drop into that area to capture those properties before he gets in place to block me forever. I saw one very high level player in this map just get completely overrun as player 1 and denied the entire left front by just a couple of vehicles rushing in there early on. Player 2's build order and lander drops are a lot more scary and effective than anything player 1 can use to counter him. But I think what I can do is capture the properties early, and then bring in artillery to hold them. Speaking of lander timing, Mr. Mumo only dropped off one guy with that, so playing pretty conservatively here, I would say. On my side, I'm not playing conservatively at all. The conventional play, I think, would be to have had the infantry that I had walk left and stand on that plain, cross that mountain, and go for the city that's a bit north of my HQ. But I'm instead going for a double infantry drop over there onto the left front to capture those contested properties before they're locked out forever. And I delay my vehicles and just go for more infantry and a better economic opening. I need to get more infantry out, and I can't build an early tank, so I need to just build artillery instead next turn. Not my favorite opener, but really the only one that's an option for player 1 I would say that works well. So, as I expected, a J4 super early tank, but the lander is not positioned to drop it off very early. I think one reason for that is that, unlike me, Mr. Mumu is planning to go for the airport early. I'm not going to do that. I think the airport is a trap on this map, honestly. At least going for it early is a trap. It's really far off the beaten path, and in the early turns, your most precious resource is your lander. If you're having your lander walk out of its way and drop off one infantry to go for the airport over there, that delays the rest of your development so much, both militarily and economically. And what will your reward be? Well, you have an infantry that's just stuck there, unless you have the lander go back and ferry the guy out. And you can build copters that are blocked by a pipe and come out really predictably. Also, I know that Mr. Mumu always builds either turn 7 or turn 8 anti-air, and usually builds a second anti-air soon thereafter. So I am not going to waste my time going for early copters. And again, I pass up some early properties just to go for the more contested ones first. That's not always a good idea by any means, but here, where player 2 can pressure that left side so fast, if you don't get those properties early, I think it's pretty well worth doing. So, here I get a recon to harass the right side, where I expect Mr. Mumo to have basically nothing. And I move my lander back to help develop an artillery into either the middle or the left front fast, and also an infantry. Now, I'm not usually a huge believer in artillery. They do, of course, have their place. But this map, I think, favors them quite well. Yeah, going for that airport, so really delaying his economic and military start quite a lot to do that. Anyway, usually artillery have a problem in fog, which is that maps are wide open, and so it's hard to wall for them. This map, though, is not wide open. There are these impassable pipes, and also a tile of sea near them and a forest at a choke point, which make it so that it's really easy to set up a good wall for your artillery and keep them safe behind a couple of infantry. It helps that the enemy airport is really far away from here, so they can't even bring in copters to deal with your artillery. And no comm towers makes it harder to break walls, too. Also, usually you can deal with artillery by shifting to fight somewhere else. This map doesn't really have 2 fronts, it has more like 4, I would say. Obviously there's the far left vertical section. Then there's sort of the left side of the middle, where there are 2 contestable properties near the pipe. And then, of course, the 2 right side fronts mirror that. Theoretically, I guess the middle itself is also kind of a front, but it's wide open with no good terrain and nothing to fight over, so I would mostly avoid that early game. Anyway, usually you can avoid artillery by just moving elsewhere when you see them. The artillery have a tough time moving with you, partly because they can't move and shoot, but even more so because they have to wait for infantry walls to keep up with them. So unless an enemy happens to blunder into range, the artillery might not actually accomplish very much. But here, the pipe and terrain create a natural perfect defense. So artillery can shift back and forth like the tanks pretty effectively from the far left front to the mid left front, warding them off either way. And that is my plan, basically. Instead of a conventional strong side weak side approach, my strategy here is going to be to have, first of all, a strong left side at the beginning just to blunt his early aggression, but then shift to having 2 medium sides. Although I'll be outnumbered on the left, I think with good defensive positions I can still hold him off for a very long time at the very least. Meanwhile, a medium number of my forces on the right should be able to overrun his almost empty front, where he can't form any walls and doesn't have much backing them up. Not how I usually play, but I think it's a good choice for this matchup in this map against its opponent. Okay, so my recon drives over those shoals, it'll be able to scout and hopefully harass Mr. Mumu soon, and I use that lander to develop my artillery and infantry closer to the middle faster. Artillery are a unit which is really good to build early if you think that you'll need one, because it takes so much time to get into position. Having the lander let me delay building it and still get it out into position at a pretty reasonable amount of time, thus boosting my economy by letting me build infantry earlier instead of getting the artillery out a turn ago. This is one of the many ways that I think landers make maps more interesting and allow lots of different strategies that are not always viable on conventional non-lander maps. More flexibility about what you make your strong side and how you get your troops around is nice too. I really like the idea of this map, I want to say. I just feel like in practice it has too much of a bias toward player 2. Okay, so pretty much as predicted, going for tank followed by recon. I expect it to be followed by another tank on the left, basically. But Mr. Mumu does diverge from his usual play a little bit here, and will actually build himself a recon infantry. I guess just because he didn't have quite enough funds to instead build something like a tank. But I would have probably expected him to just save his money and maybe build like tank next turn or anti-air next turn on the left side. So a bit of a departure from what I expected here, but not a big deal. Alright, so get some captures. Going for more of those contested properties while the getting is good. On the right side, my recon is just cheerily driving to position to where it can hopefully harass him in the future. And I moved that artillery to where it can cover an infantry walking next to that city next turn. If he uses lander to drop off his tank, it could already be in that forest, or about to approach this city. So I want to have a unit covering me already in position, just in case. At all times, I tried to prepare for the worst case scenario that was possible with the evidence that I knew about. So if he had already dropped off and was driving over to harass me now, I'd be able to reveal him and shoot him next turn. As it turns out, he wasn't actually doing that, but that's okay. No harm done to me for just assuming the worst. The reason I walked that infantry north is just to remind me to put it onto the lander next turn and go for the airport. Now is a decent time to do that. Nothing else is more pressing anymore. Speaking of which, I can now build my first tank. I would have loved to do so earlier, but there were more pressing things going on and I couldn't afford it. So the question now is the first enemy tank going to show up in one of the cities on the left, or in the forest? And because it's Mr. Mumu, I'm pretty confident it'll be in the forest. I was also expecting at this point that he would build an anti-air this turn, most likely. Either now or next turn. But there's no way he'd delay it beyond turn 8. He always builds one turn 7 or turn 8, like clockwork. Then I saw that recon on the right, which is a bit of a departure from his usual style, so I knew something was going to be a little bit different this game, which is good. On his side you can see the lander's really not accomplishing that much, because the airport is so out of the way. And now, although I don't see it yet, he surprises me here by building that tank on the right. Just shows you shouldn't read too much into looking at people's replays, even if they were hitherto very consistent. So, diverged a little bit from what I expected, but it won't make a big difference, really. Fundamentally, I was right that his opener would be to build a tank on the left and drive it into that forest, which means he won't see my infantry creep along from the city it just captured into the other forest and then south to grab the city. So that's what I'll do. So, as mentioned, I'm going for the airport. Later than him by 2 turns, but that was well worth it, I think, for letting me develop my economy and military elsewhere faster. And I prepare to capture these 3 cities in a somewhat diagonal line here that will mark my initial border before I do the push on the right side. There really aren't that many contested cities on this map. In fact, I would say there are really just 4. The one my artillery is near is one contested city, and of course so is the mirror city on his side. And the one that my left infantry is just above is the other contested city. Barring a player 2 super fast vehicle rush, which I have seen happen, most other things are pretty safely in one player's hands or the other. So I keep my tank out of sight where it covers everything. And I'll use my black boat to get a little bit of a movement bonus. I really tried to get maximum use out of all of my transports in this mission. Not just the lander, but the black boat and the T-copter that I built later too. I would love to buy 2 tanks right now, but I'm short 1,000 funds, so it'll have to be a tank and an artillery. And I'm also thinking about what I want to have the lander carry next turn. I'm always trying to think 1 or 2 turns ahead with my lander and what I build. Now, in the very unlikely event that the left front turns out to be quieter than I expected, my plan is to have this new artillery walk to a spot near my black boat on the HQ. The sea tile there and the black boat form an almost perfect wall, making that an basically impregnable spot to have an artillery guard your city. That can either guard that flank while you advance on the far right, or provide covering fire while your other troops walk toward their contested city and try to push them off of it. So I get some good intel this turn. I see him going for that contested property, and I see that he has a recon, which is unexpected, but not that surprising. Crucially, I know that they can't actually cover the infantry capturing that contested city. As you can see, he gets his airport, but his infantry is now stuck there forever, unless he either builds a T-copter or wastes the lander's time bringing it back over there. On the left side, things went as I envisioned they would. Mr. Mumu can't see any targets and therefore just contentedly waits in that forest. And he also returns to form, building the expected anti-air and tank on the strong side. So, classic Mr. Mumo again this turn. And I am not, by any means, saying those are not good moves, by the way, let me make that clear. This is a good, solid way to play. It's just that I'm successfully predicting it and countering it. I try to not be predictable myself and just do different things every game based on the CO matchup and the map. Certainly wouldn't want to lose because somebody watches my content and knows that I always do the same thing or something like that. So, this turn I begin a lot of captures. I don't expect that I'll get all of them. 5 of them are potentially contestable, at the very least. Speaking of contestable things, I attack this infantry expecting it to be safe, but oh, what a surprise. There's a tank right there. Now, of course, that means there's one fewer tank on the left side, so it'll help me hold the line there. But it does kill my momentum on this side. Anyway, operating under the assumption that his tank is in that forest, I move my tank where it can't be seen from that forest and where it covers my capturers on the left side here. Pretty well, anyway. I'm striking a balance here between coverage and staying at a possible scouting range of recons and things like that. Given what I've seen that he has on the right, I know his left forces can't be so overwhelming that I need to worry too much about coverage beyond this level right now. The million gold question right now is, of these 5 contestable captures that I'm doing, how many will I get away with? This is the turn where my capture order should swing ahead of all the more traditional capture orders. If I get away with at least 3, which is probable, I'll be swinging ahead of all the other capture orders that I've seen. Now, what I was thinking as I looked at the right side of the middle is, I know he is at most 1 tank on the left side, given what I've seen on the right side. So I don't need much firepower on the left to effectively counter anything he could throw at my capturers. What I would like is a way to defend my recon, and prevent him from overrunning my lightly defended right. Now he probably would like to continue with this capture. I had a minimum luck roll attacking him, he should have been reduced to 5 HP. So he probably feels safe to continue that capture, meaning that City Tile will stay blocked. So his tank might want to attack from the plain side, and specifically the left one is more likely to be safe than the right one is. So if I have my artillery drive over here behind this makeshift infantry wall, I can threaten that tile that he'll probably want to attack from. So, that's my reasoning. I don't have a perfect option here, this seems to be the one that covers the most bases that are available to me. Alright, so I build my vehicles, once again going much heavier than usual on artillery, because I feel like it fits this map and fits my strategy. And of course fits my amount of funds. So he does pull back, giving up that capture, so I can't counter him, but my recon is alive to scout another day, and I did at least stop that 1 capture, so that's a silver lining. On the mirror image side, he does interrupt my capture too, so we basically struck each other in more or less the same way. He also had to reveal another early vehicle to do that. I now know he has a recon on the left side, recon on the right side, tank on the right side, and I'm certain he has a tank on the left side too. So, an unusually open split for Mr. Mumo's opener, but now I know what he has. He gets his 3 cities in a line, I get mine. Those are almost never contested, so no big surprise there. His lander drop is not very aggressive all in all. And his anti-air is advancing on the left, but it won't be very useful there because I have no battlecopters, no intention to build any for a while. As I expected, he sees no target for his tank, so he's content to sit tight. He's finished capturing his airport, but his infantry is now going to be stranded forever unless he brings over the lander to rescue it. And he builds himself an early battlecopter. I don't have a counter, but that's really not a big deal. The way I see it, on this map if he has an early copter, it means he paid a lot to get it. He'd sacrifice something for it. So even if he gets some value, going uncountered for a turn or 2, that still just kind of makes him break even, I would say. And in the meantime, by delaying my anti-air, I can get more tanks out. Tanks are very strong units. I think you've seen that on some maps I go for early anti-airs, and some maps I don't. It just depends on where the airport is, what the COs are, and so forth. Here I think it's justifiable to delay the anti-air a while. So, my turn, and I'm very happy to have gotten away with 4 out of the 5 contested properties. That worked very well. At this point, my capture order is officially a success. It's doing better than the other ones would have. There was one turn where the delayed money made me get a artillery instead of a tank, but I kind of wanted the artillery anyway, so it wasn't a big deal. So, here I feel quite comfortable just going in with my tanks. I know I have local numerical superiority, I know I have tons of coverage, so I can set up a no-win situation for him here where he just can't counterattack me. Regrettably, he can see this lander drop, but I think that's worth it to have my forces covering each other for the time being. I want him to just back off, Really, what I'm hoping for, what my strategy is to make him shift back and forth uselessly between the far left and the mid-left fronts, with my artillery following him and blocking him either way. I want my defense force to be able to just hold him off like that and waste his time on his strong side, while my force on my strong side just overruns him. So every turn that he backs off is a win for me. This recon might be able to sneak into the middle forest next turn. That's my hope. On the right side I now have no vehicles, so no sense in advancing any further there. I'll just try to get good terrain and hold it. For that reason, although I considered building an anti-air, I felt like I couldn't really justify it this turn. I need a tank on the right side so I can actually move that side forward. So double tanks it is. Mr. Moo reveals that I've already got that city. He's not even close to starting the equivalent, so I'm sure he realizes he's behind on that count. If he thinks about it, I'm sure he gets some information from this about what my initial capture order was and use of my lander, but it's probably too late for that to matter much. As anticipated, here he's just forced to back off and not attack into my dense formation there. Unfortunately, I do see him claim the forest, so I can't get into it myself very easily. And he shoots the infantry a turn too late, and I can just back off to safety now. Resume trying to capture the contested property, as expected, guarded by his tank. I can't see that going on, but it's what I expected would happen. It's the obvious move. On the right side he stays cautious. I have no vehicles there, but he doesn't really know that for sure, so he doesn't risk his recon. He's a cautious player, I would say. In his shoes, I think I would have felt fairly safe going in further and attacking. That's a difference of style, not really right or wrong. But building that anti-air on the right side I would say was definitely a mistake. It's useless there. I have no airport there, and it takes like 20 turns to move a copter from the left corner to the right side. And he already has a copter of his own in the area to cover himself anyway. So that should have been a tank, not an anti-air, I would say. From what I've seen though, Mr. Moo loves to have multiple anti-airs. He usually builds a second one around this turn, so I'm not too surprised. I like anti-airs, but they have a heavy opportunity cost. Every anti-air is being down a tank, or maybe even a battlecopter. So, I thought long and hard, and then decided to sacrifice an infantry to attack his capturer here. I know that if I attack him like this, my infantry will die. Now, money-wise, I lose 1,000, he loses 1,400 from delayed capture and the damaged infantry. Is that worth it? Usually no, I would say, actually. Being down in unit count is not a good thing. But, this is my 2-base side, where I have nothing but infantry right now, and nothing to use them for. So losing one there isn't too big a deal, compared to if I lost one on my 1-base side on the left. Likewise on this front, his infantry are rare and precious, and injuring one of them is a hefty blow to him compared to me. But most importantly, I need to do this for my strategy to work. I just need to buy time for my vehicles to show up on the right side. I have enough guys to defend the left side. Now I just need to get in position and then push the right side. But if he's already captured things there, that push will be mostly useless. So in this case, I think it's worth sacrificing this infantry to interrupt him here. Also, last time I did this, I noticed that he gave up the capture entirely, pulled back and brought in the tank to stand on that city. He might do so again, delaying himself even more. In that case, he's losing not 1,400, but at least 2,400 money. Maybe more. That's a pretty good trade for me, really. Alright, so as I expected, he shifted from the mid-left to the far left, and I will just do the same thing. But, I'm about to make a terrible misclick that you'll see in a few moves here. As before, I thought carefully about this formation to try to have both good coverage and make it hard for him to see exactly what I have and where. On the right side I put my artillery in that wonderful safe spot, where it both covers my infantry on the city and threatens to protect my infantry that interrupted his capture. The other infantry on the right just stay hunkered down in safe spots. The lander positions help carry people next turn. And here is a terrible misclick, leaving my artillery covered by basically nothing and in terrible danger. I meant to put the Furies infantry there, and the artillery one north of it. That's what I thought I had selected when I said yes to that move. So when I saw the artillery move instead, my jaw just about hit the floor. This could really set me back. I do have tanks covering it, but it's not a good situation at all. My best defense will just be his cautious nature, I think. He does have a recon that could spot that hole in my defenses, but he might not actually use it. So because of that misclick, I delay the anti-air one more turn. That is not good. I really should have an anti-air by now. And I plan to have an anti-air by now. But with that mistake, my priorities just flipped and I had to defend the middle instead. For that, I need more tanks. If I get hit now by a copter on the right, I might lose half an infantry. If I get hit in the middle by the wrong things, I might lose the game. Do note that if I had built the anti-air this turn, it would have stopped this copter from getting more than one free hit on an infantry. So I do stand by the choice to delay the anti-air until this turn in this case. Anyway, I'll build myself a T-copter, both to get my infantry back into the action from that airport, and also because I foresee needing to get infantry from whichever side I have more on to the one that I have fewer on as needs change. And with that, I'll basically just grit my teeth and wait to see what move he makes and how badly it goes. If my artillery was in the right place, I think you can see he wouldn't really have any good moves available to him. But because I'm in the wrong one, he does have some good options. Not surprisingly, he threatens to steal my contested city over there on the left. On the middle right though, he once again gives up his capture to just safely kill my infantry. What we're seeing here really is that Mr. Mumu is playing for unit count, I'm playing for income. I'm trying to play a long defensive game where an income advantage slowly builds up into a bigger and bigger lead for me. That's the only way I can see to break this Olaf versus Olaf mirror match. So he's doing what I want over there, giving up that capture to kill my infantry instead. You can see also just how late he is getting these properties on the right compared to me getting the ones on the left. My capture order is not by any means the only good one, but for the strategy that I had in mind, I think it was the best one. In this game, I think it's very important that all pieces of your strategy fit together cohesively. Your capture order should be the one that gets you whatever money you need to get the vehicles that you want. And the vehicles you get need to be the ones that lead to some kind of win condition for you. I will also add that the lander makes it more attractive to skip some early money like I did. With good lander use, going for distant cities doesn't necessarily slow your capture order down all that much. Notice, by the way, that Mr. Mumu is being tricky with his copter, and not taking it to the obvious side, but instead over toward the middle or the left. I like the cleverness of that in theory. But on this map, where the airport is so isolated, and it takes so many turns just to walk over into position, I don't really think it's worth it. During the 4 turns or so it's flying over, I'll surely have built copters of my own, and they'll be waiting for it, basically. Anyway, other than that, he plays sensibly, he plays conservatively, but unfortunately he kind of plays into my hands, backing off there. He's building his own wall, but he's building a wall on his strong side. I want the game to slow down there. I want to just hold what I've got. And I have no intention of driving up and attacking him on his strong side. And you'll see that he builds a rocket. Now, Mr. Mumu likes rockets more than most people do. And I will say, on this map, with the lander ready to help carry the rocket around and negate its biggest weakness of bad movement, a rocket is decent at least, I think. It's also a great counter to somebody like me trying to wall him out with artillery. So I think he made a solid choice building it. It's just a question now of how effectively he'll be using it. Usually I would say that rockets are not a good choice as much as I like them and want to use them. But here on this map, in these circumstances, I can agree with it. On the right side we're both being cautious because neither of us have any vehicles there really. Since my recon got hit, I've been content to just hold the line there, but that will change soon. My vehicles are now showing up. I am very happy this turn to have finished capturing my other property over there on the left. My aggressive lander drop strategy is really paying off. On the right side I scout his city and see, oh excellent, it is open. That tells me with certainty for the first time that I'm now ahead on income, which is really good for player 1. On the mirrored sides of the map, I try to interrupt his capture and also begin my own. I've got tanks and artillery and lots of other covering units coming in, so I feel pretty good about this, as long as I have my formation set up right. I am expecting a copter over on the right, so my formations sort of reflect my fears about where a copter could probably be, and trying to keep my guys safe from it. I also need to be guarding against some kind of tank plus battlecopter breakthrough from the city near the middle, for example. I thought there were a lot of possibilities about what he might have out there in the fog, and this seemed like the best compromised position to deal with any of those possibilities. In the mid-left, knowing that he's occupied elsewhere, I go for the capture on the contested property once again. And on the far left, I put the artillery where it can push him off of that city again, and wall up with tanks and infantry around that. It's not the formation I would love to have, but it's the best one available to me under the circumstances, I think. He can first strike me, his 3 tanks to my 3 tanks, but I have an artillery and he only has an anti-air, and my formation is pretty good. Anticipating trouble though, I drop off reinforcements in as versatile a position as I can find, and scout my infantry on the mountain. And finally, I build my long-delayed anti-air. I really should have built that last turn, but I just felt like I needed to have the extra tank in case he attacked into the middle. Luckily, he was too cautious and didn't do that. didn't even see the opportunity until it was too late, I think. I build a third recon pretty reluctantly. My other two are both on the right side, so I feel like I don't have much vision on the left right now. I feel like I need to be able to see where he's shifting his troops so I can build good formations to counter them, and a recon will help a lot with that. Also, having built a copter of my own on the left side, I want to be able to see where his anti-airs are and things like that so I can avoid them, so the recon's kind of good copter support. But I do feel very aware at this point that I've now sunk 3 recons and 1 T-copter's worth of units into non-combat things, basically. So that means I'm vulnerable. We'll see what he does on his turn. More or less as I expected, he gives up on the capture and goes for first strikes instead. Pretty painful. But it's also not quite as bad as you might expect. After his 3 first strikes, I'm behind by only about 1.1 tanks. Not good, but not as devastating as you might think when you hear the enemy first striking you with 3 tanks. He couldn't get through to the artillery or the reserves, so now he's in trouble. His lander drop there is completely useless, unfortunately. He really didn't ultimately use that lander to get the rocket into place any faster, so all the normal weaknesses of rockets do fully apply to this one. But he does keep good formations, he does build good walls. I could not get through and exploit any weaknesses there, really. Throughout this match, I would generally say that his formations were quite good, except maybe when he was attacking, which is always a time when your formations are inevitably going to be vulnerable. Or at least almost always. I think he did make a mistake here. Move your scouts first, see what they reveal, and then make decisions with your other units. He could have interrupted that capture if he'd moved the recon first. At the cost of his own infantry, of course, but I do think this is a case where that is worth it, just like it was worth it for me. Unfortunately for him, my strategy is working at this point. I am now ahead of him on income, which, for me being player 1, is very good for me. Notice on this interrupt on the right side that he actually attacks with the infantry first and then the recon. We'll see similar moves a couple of times. That's kind of counterintuitive, but I think the point of it is to keep his recon so it can't easily be instant killed by a tank, which makes some sense. I'm not certain that's worth it, because the chance of a tank wiping out a recon in one shot after the recon hits an infantry is only about 1 in 3 under these circumstances, but I think that was his consideration, and it is at least worth thinking about. Given that his copter is currently going to the top left, I think it was a good choice to build another one on the bottom right here. He certainly needs one there. I do have an anti-air coming by now, of course, but he built the right things this turn, I would say. He knows he's going to need new tanks on the left imminently, and his lander is well positioned to help those tanks out. So, how do things stand at this point? Well, I'm behind a decent amount of unit count. Being behind 5 units out of almost 40 is not that bad, but it certainly is a disadvantage for me. I'm a bit behind on value, but not really, because player 2 is always ahead about this much on value if player 2 has not screwed up badly. But the really good news is my strategy is now in full swing. I have an income lead, I have my defenses more or less built up on the left side, a medium force holding off his strong one, and my vehicles are showing up on the right side and are about to overrun his token force. At least, that's the theory. All my plans were to come to this point, and now I need to execute well and use that to actually win the game. For the third time, I'm going to make a small sacrifice of 1 infantry on the right side to interrupt his capture. Doing that is basically the whole reason I'm behind on unit count. And again, it's a maneuver I would not recommend doing all the time. I just felt like it fit my strategy under these circumstances in this matchup. I'm fairly proud of my upcoming maneuvers. I think I managed my formations and units pretty well during these turns. First, I gather my intel and set up my important blockers to make sure my flanks are safe. On the left side, I had to consider whether to go for kills or go for financial damage. I went for maximum financial damage. You'll see that in terms of value, even though he had the first strike and it's his strong side, he came out behind 0.2 tanks. So that is great for my strategy so far. In terms of numbers though, he got a kill and I didn't get a kill. One thing I'm thinking about at this point though, which helped guide my decision, is that with Winter Fury or any other global damage power, they're actually more destructive if your opponent has a bunch of weakened units around instead of one full health one. The other good news is I got that contested property which my artillery was guarding, so it can shift to give me backup in case he has the second wave coming. I built up a pretty good wall here, and I did some calculations about what kind of units he could plausibly have out there in the fog. Things like if he has an ND tank, if he has 2 tanks, stuff like that. By my calculations, even if he has pretty good luck, I would come out ahead, so I felt pretty good about that. So I'll bring up my reinforcements and then shift my attention back to the right side, where there are still complicated maneuvers to execute. Once again, I'm going more for value damage than for getting kills. I believe very much most of the time in removing enemy unit count from the board, but here I just didn't seem to have good ways to do that without sacrificing more stuff on my side. The lack of comm towers or attack bonuses means I just can't kill his guys. but it would be foolhardy to throw full health units away trying to secure kills on guys with 1 or 2 or 3 HP. This strike force is small and doesn't have many reinforcements coming, so I've got to keep them all alive if I can. Speaking of such things, I feel the need to reinforce my infantry that are dying in the middle, so my T-Copter moves over in that general direction to help out. Normally I would build an MD tank by this point, but I've already smashed his main cluster of tanks, so I don't need an MD tank for that. And I'm barely using air units, so I don't really need to hunt down and instant kill anti-airs. And I already have lots of artillery to counter his possible MD tanks. And I need reinforcements on multiple fronts at the same time. So for those reasons, I feel like building triple tanks was a better option than building an MD tank would have been under these circumstances. Let me know if you disagree though. Now on the left, after 4 turns of painful setup, he gets his surprise counterattack and kills 1 infantry. Luckily for him, my own copter was really delayed and is not quite in position to punish him for that. But I think you can see that was a big time investment and could have ended really badly for him. So I think I stand by my assessment that on this map, unlike on many maps, going for the element of surprise with a copter like that is not really worth the time delay. Another thing that I think is not really worth it here is that as he kills 2 of my infantry, he's leaving a lot more of his exposed. Speaking of things being exposed, I think this turn, unusually for him, he made a pretty big mistake with his anti-air and it doesn't cover his copter, which is crucially necessary. Luckily I don't actually have a copter in range, but I almost certainly would by this point. Speaking of things being delayed, his rocket is still just very slowly crawling into position. Just like his copter, that's a lot of money invested in things that were not actually paying off at all. Which is one reason I wasn't really suffering despite building a T-Copter and other non-combat units, which I had been worried about. You'll note on the right that his anti-air there is still useless, unfortunately, so he pulls back to defensive lines in a pretty reasonable formation. He's way ahead on unit count, but this is the turn where net combat damage swung in my favor, and income is in my favor too, so momentum is on my side. Now he builds a medium tank, which is a great way to break opponents' momentum, but I think he built it on the wrong side. He knows I have at least 2 artillery over there on the left side. He also knows he already took out several of my tanks over there, so there's not that much natural prey left for it either. On the right side though, he has almost nothing and has a copter which he must defend from anti-airs. I think if I was him, I would have built a medium tank on the right side this turn most likely. But this is Mr. Mumu, who likes to focus on his natural strong side, which is usually a very good idea. And hey, a medium tank is a great wall breaker over there. So I think the move is justifiable, but is probably not what I would have done. So on the right, I think my maneuvers and formation were again generally pretty good this turn. First of all, as always, I scout and see what he has, and the answer is not much. But I don't get greedy, I advance slowly and steadily. I need to keep these troops, especially the artillery, alive, and keep them in range that my anti-air can cover, because there will definitely be copters coming at me soon. I will say that at this point I was wishing for one more guy to help block that pond off so a copter couldn't possibly go for a flank. So, you know, there are some consequences for having lost 3 infantry trying to stop him from getting that one capture. But I do think it was worth it, because it's been like 7 turns and he still doesn't have it. On the left side, the dance continues. My partner shifts to the right, I shift with him. I set up enough coverage and enough walls that he can't profitably attack me. And I intend to just keep elegantly gliding back and forth every turn while his strong side advantage wastes away. You'll see that we're both taking in our tanks for repairs, which is fine for both of us, but it helps me more, because stagnation is my friend on this side of the map. I pull one of my usual tricks there and try to fake him out, driving my tank in a weird view, just in case he had a recon watching it depart but didn't see where it ended up again. And I make sure to position my own copter outside of what he can easily see, but where it covers all my important units. Anyway, I put that tank on the city as bait. We'll see whether his copter takes the bait or not. You'll see that I do another silly tank movement to try to fake him out. And I make the risky choice to use my transports to move more infantry from my weak side to my strong side. That may have been a mistake. I'm running short of infantry to wall with on the left. But getting a lot of infantry right now to the middle right could cheaply save 2 cities. So sort of a small risk of catastrophic collapse versus a medium-sized reward guaranteed. I'm an aggressive player, I went for it. One reason that I built a copter this turn was that I saw a desperate need for more infantry. Building a copter left my bases free to make infantry. I also do just need to make sure I have a spare unit to counter his left copter. And his tanks and whatnot, of course. Once again on the middle right, I'm sacrificing an infantry, although it lives at 1 HP this time. Once again he doesn't get the city. Once again he himself takes some pretty hefty infantry damage too. But now we're getting to the point where he might never get that city, because my vehicles are showing up in force. He does slow down my capture on the far right, and notice once again, by the way, that he keeps his vehicles back as infantry do the interrupting. Trying to keep his vehicles safe, but he knows that there's an artillery pointed right at that force, so that is not actually safe at all. His poor rocket on the left is still doing nothing. Nor are most of his units. The dance continues. He shifts from the right back over to the left. Again, every time that happens represents my plan working out as intended. It's a step closer to winning for me. I think he wisely sees the danger on the mid-right at this point, and does a joint capture to try to get that city, but it's probably too late. Too late, that is, because I did take that risk to move that infantry in toward that side. I do also once again want to call some attention to the use of the landers on each side. Whatever the biggest vehicle is that I build on a given turn, I usually have my lander ready to help carry it, because I plan to that at least 1 or maybe 2 turns in advance. In terms of what he built this turn, I really think he should have gone harder on the right side. Probably tank copter there, maybe MD tank there, and base skip on the far left to make it happen. He had plenty of infantry over there. That's what I expected he was doing at this point, because that for me would have been the worst case scenario. Anyway, on the right I face another puzzle here. I have only a small force, and I want to number 1 wipe out his army, including the guy hidden in the forest. Number 2 threaten 2 different captures. Number 3 maintain good coverage, and number 4 interrupt his capture over in the mid-right. I think I moved pretty efficiently and pretty well to achieve those objectives here. This is a great breakthrough. And once again, with units that he could plausibly have given what I've seen on the left, it'd be pretty hard to punish. I do leave a tank kind of exposed on the mid-right, but you'll see after I move my other tanks for this turn that I do kind of cover it, at least against tank attacks. With the sacrifice of my infantry that was at 1 HP to guarantee the kill, I was able to stop him with just 1 left out of 20 to capture that building. Back to square 1. Now this turn, I really don't want him to get a superpower yet, or at least I want him to have no good targets to attack after using it. So I anticipate the usual shift back to the far left, but I try to keep most of my tanks in places where he can't really attack them very well. Things which will make it hard to build up power without some sacrifices at least. That said, I knew this was not by any means guaranteed to work to stop him getting his superpower this turn. But I was doing my best to mitigate that possibility, and also to ensure that even if he did use it and had a breakthrough, some of my units will be safe to do a counterattack. I do make a questionable move here, shifting my copter over toward the middle. The reason for that is that I had lost sight of his copter, and knew he might be spamming new copters himself on the right, or building an MD tank there. Still, it at least arguably should have stayed on the left side, where there's almost guaranteed to be heavy fighting soon. Speaking of which, I'm going to build a Neo tank now. Partly because it will let me efficiently pump out 2 more infantry this turn, but also I am just certain he has at least 1 medium tank out there, and to know that sooner or later, my artillery walls won't be able to hold up. Not with his superpower coming out. So I need something which can be deployed fast, and can hunt down enemy tanks instead of hoping they fall into ambushes. And also, if he doesn't superpower this turn, he inevitably will next turn, and I can put my Neo tank into a lander at that point to keep it safe. I couldn't do that if I built a bomber. Basically, I'm trying to keep thinking a turn or 2 ahead here about how to keep my units safe and prepare for his superpower when it comes, which I don't think will be this turn. Alright, on the left he begins the big push, and he breaks through. He can hit my artillery. I left the artillery in that somewhat vulnerable position to make sure it could cover the city so he couldn't easily capture it. This hurts, but it doesn't hurt enough to give him his superpower. I left him almost no targets, so that worked out as planned. His rocket is finally in a position to fight, which is good for him, but it's taken way too long to get there. That rocket really could have punished my shenanigans shifting my artillery back and forth. Just lying in wait and outranging me would have been pretty devastating. He's being smart here, keeping a lot of his vehicles in reserve where they're not really vulnerable to me. They can't help with his push yet, so he keeps them safe. What I would love to do, and what I'm sure he's anticipating, I would love to surprise him and get my super before he gets his, despite him having taken more damage so far, and he is smart not to let me do it. I'm sure he knows at this point that he has 1 big shot, and he plays well and does not let me ruin it for him. I also would have done well to take a leaf from his book, and be more defensive with my vehicles on the left side at this point. But on the right side, he definitely made a mistake, not building his MD tank there. The previous one was debatable. Right now, it's an emergency. He needs forces there. I don't know just how dire his position is there, but he should know he's about to lose 3 cities. So, my turn. So far, everything is according to plan. I've got a big income lead now, but I must plan around 2 things now. The big push I know is coming on the left, and his superpower. So, now I know I have a 5,000 income lead. 2,000 income, not going to win you the game. 5,000 income, he's on a timer now. Maybe even better yet, I can now see his airport and his convenient route out of his base, so I know what will be coming on the right side. I think that kind of intel advantage is hugely valuable. Speaking of value, I go for another capture here. I'm not really thinking that I'm going to get it, but thinking that I can bait his precious few vehicles out into an ambush. I'm trying to create no-win scenarios for him there, either lose cities or lose his last few units. I pull a lot of my forces back to defensive positions and brace for Winter Fury, putting tanks on cities so they can get prepared and things like that. The anti-air doesn't really need to be on one, because an 8 HP anti-air can still rip up copters. Plus, I know he doesn't have any air units right there anyway. Now, what I would have loved at this point would be to sacrifice a unit, pull out my superpower before he gets his, and ruin his big push before it gets underway. But he was too smart. He didn't give me any opportunities to do that. So I'm in a bit of a bind here, and I think I make some wrong moves. I know this wall won't really be able to hold. I feel at this point 95% certain that he has either a rocket or an empty tank pointed right at me. Basically, I feel forced to make a choice between interrupting his capture and keeping my vehicles safely far back. I probably should have just let him have the capture and pulled my guys back to safety and keep more vehicles alive. I should probably have sacrificed the city and kept my vehicles alive instead. This is just about the best wall that I can make with what I had, but it's not a very good wall. I do realize that it's going to be a problem and swing my copter back that way. I also use my transports to protect units from Winter Fury. Anything in a transport does not take any global damage, so I put a Neo-tank and a tank into my lander, I put an infantry into my T-copter and just keep them off the field where they'll be totally unharmed. Likewise, I save most of my money. I do build an artillery because I feel like the timing and positioning of those is so important that I'm willing to pay 1,200 to just get it out a turn earlier, basically. All told, I sacrificed some tempo and positioning, but I saved myself more than 10,000 in funds damage from Winter Fury, so I think it's an okay choice at least. So, here comes the big breakthrough he's been waiting for. He's got Winter Fury, and I gave him an opening, so he just blasts away. Obviously I take massive funds damage, his rocket breaks through my wall, his anti-air kills my copter, that leaves my artillery vulnerable suddenly. Up until now I think I mostly had good formations. This is the first time I would say I made a really big mistake. The mistake being to try to build a formation at all instead of just pulling back to a safer spot, because I did not have enough pieces to make a good wall. But I will say, I kind of knew the risk, and I knew that even despite what could go wrong here, I was feeling pretty confident. I've got my own superpower and my superior income to break his momentum here. Look at his poor anti-air on the right, it's still completely worthless. There has never been a copter there will never be a copter there. But on the left, this was a more devastating attack than I thought would be coming. And unlike before, I don't have a lot of reserves at the ready, really. In hindsight, my idea of putting a tank onto the lander was probably not a good idea. Neo-tank, yes, but it should have been Neo-tank plus infantry, probably. The tank was in place where it could have just moved in and served as reinforcements. That would have been better. And likewise, it would have been better to let him get 1 city in exchange for me getting 3 cities from him. That's clearly a good trade for me. Instead, I lost much of my defensive force. I will say, though, I don't think he really thought ahead to my upcoming Winter Fury. He doesn't really save money, he doesn't really put people on the transports, they're all just going to be left fully exposed. He builds a rocket again here. I think that was definitely a mistake. The first rocket was a good idea, not very well executed, I would say. This one at this time, just not a good idea. He already has his breakthrough anyway, and the bigger problem, of course, is that he's getting overrun on the right side. He doesn't have the luxury to build a rocket over there on the left where he's already winning. Now, on unit value, I look like I'm kind of behind right now, but of course, I have money saved up and haven't used my superpower yet. Speaking of inaccurate comparisons, let me just say as an aside here that one thing I absolutely can't stand is when I see other YouTube Advance Wars players making comparisons at the start of player 2's turn. The only intelligent and meaningful time to compare these stats is when everyone has had an equal number of turns. Anyway, here goes my superpower. So on the right I keep my push going, slow and steady, and on the left I just try to work on breaking his momentum and stabilizing the situation that I got myself into. I'll try to form a newer, smaller wall to keep me from getting continued breakthroughs. And I'll work on taking down his anti-air and damaging his battlecopter so that mine will have free reign. That will really hamper any progress of his unless he has another anti-air there. And I'll bring in some serious reinforcements. As you can see, if I can hold on for just one or so more turns, and not have my Neotank walk into rocket range at the end of that, I should be able to start pushing him back. And because he has no healthy capture or infantry left, he can't even get any income lead off of me. On the right side I try to just squeeze out every small advantage I can get. I try to grab all the good terrain, set up what defensive lines I can with my small force, and make him keep marching tanks or vehicles right into my artillery's range to stop me from getting that capture. I'll keep my anti-air safe even though I'm 90% sure he has no copters. I wouldn't want him to be able to kill it and then build one with complete safety. And on the far left I bring up my Neotank and tank as reinforcements, and I start shifting toward where I probably should have been last turn. I'll use my 4SP artillery as bait, basically. If a tank goes for that, I can then counterattack him even harder with a fresh tank of my own. I get pretty aggressive with my recon on the right here, but the reason for that is I want him to be forced to use a vehicle to interrupt my capture. Not an infantry, a vehicle. This blocks his infantry and will hopefully lure more of his precious vehicles out into the open where I can blast away at them with either my artillery or my tanks. So, the left side isn't pretty, but I've prevented complete collapse, got reinforcements coming up, and on the right side I'm still pushing ahead. Pretty good. So he breaks through my lines there and attacks my bait artillery, so that's actually kind of good for me. He does threaten some captures, but thanks to Winter Fury that's really not that important. I have time to turn those around. His rocket is back to being not very useful for the time being, and I saw roughly where it went, which is also really good intel for me. One reason that I put the recon there. I don't really know why he did that attack with his copter, because that makes it pretty easy to scratch down his kill with infantry and things like that. Probably not worth it when he needs every unit he can get right there. Regardless, I don't think it was a good choice for him to build a new wall the way he's doing. This is just not the time to play defensively. If you're in Mr. Moo's situation right now, behind by 5,000 income and getting worse, playing conservatively just guarantees that you'll lose. At this point, he has to take a big risk. Maybe it'll pay off, maybe it won't, but there is no downside to taking a big risk at this point, because staying put is certain death. I mean, unless he's just counting on me making some kind of catastrophic blunder that makes me lose the entire game, but that's not really something that's likely to happen. He is able this time to have his lander help out his rocket, so that's good, but it was still, I think, the wrong unit choice in this case. He needs more people on the right, except for his anti-air that is, which is still useless there, so he shifts that over toward the left, but too late for that, I think. It has accomplished absolutely nothing over there all game. Okay, my turn. And now is a pretty good time to compare how we're doing. The most accurate time is the end of player 2's turn after having built everything and before player 1 gets repairs, but this is still pretty accurate. At this point I know I have a big and growing income lead, I know I have a big value lead, and we're roughly tied on number of units. I know I have a big intel lead with my strategically placed recons, I know that he can't even interrupt this new capture I'm beginning over here in the bottom right. So I don't get greedy, I don't get aggressive, I just take the obvious kills and just contentedly sit on my 7,000 growing income lead and just wait for that to win the game for me. With this new recon position I can see not only his airport, but also anything coming out of his base by any of the convenient paths. I love having that kind of intel on what the enemy is producing. Looking over at the left, as I mentioned, he took the bait with the artillery, did about 3 damage from artillery, he loses half a tank in exchange. Not a good trade. I have my copter shift northward, mostly because I think he might have an anti-air coming over, and also let my tank get onto the city. And I don't really make a fuss about his capturers this turn. I've got one more turn to wait and I know it, so for now I just work on chipping down his vehicles. Well, I bring up reinforcements and rebuild my formation, and bring up my Neotank, keeping it hidden in the fog if I can. Maybe I should have pushed it in more aggressively, but I wanted to keep it as a nice surprise so I can hopefully catch an MD tank off guard with it. And after all, no hurry for me really. I've got plenty of time and money to go for repairs while still cracking out high-tech units, and I know that he doesn't really have that opportunity. I think my builds were questionable this turn. I probably should have teched up and built another MD tank or something like that. But I felt like I needed to get more healthy vehicles up because I had almost none of those, and I'm also thinking about how the only way he can really win at this point would be to go for an HQ capture. I probably want to have an artillery guarding my HQ or something like that. Anyway, his rocket hits an infantry giving away its position. I'm not sure that was even really worth it. Not what you build a rocket for. What he's really doing, of course, is walling for his capturers. And I think that's a pretty good idea. It keeps his rocket safe too, and maybe, just maybe, I will foolishly drive like a Neotank up and attack an infantry, leaving it exposed to an MD tank or something like that. He's got to hope for things like that at this point, because he's behind by 7,000, he's drowning. He needs me to throw him a lifeline like that. I have to say though, just pulling back to defensive positions is like just staying underwater at this point. I can't condone that. He's not even trying to come up for air. For him, it is now or never, and he is choosing never. Partly, of course, I think that's a function of what units he built, how he has those two slow rockets that just can't push forward and can't accomplish much. But, my turn, I just continue taking more cities from him. Now I have a 9,000 income lead. Even if he gets those 2 captures, he's still behind by 5,000, which is still pretty hefty on a map like this. As I do almost every turn, I go for one of those cute little T-copter boosts. I love how transports work in Advanced Wars by Web. This is a great feature. At long last, I have the center woods. For the longest time, I thought he might have a recon in there watching most of my moves, and I played accordingly. I don't really think the center is all that important on this map. True, I would want to secure it before doing an HQ capture or something like that, but I don't think this map really lends itself that well to HQ captures. It's too easy to have artillery in good places to defend your HQ at multiple points. Again, you can try it, and I'm sure it does work sometimes. But it's not as easy as it is on some maps, I would say. And likewise, the flexibility of controlling the center is worth it sometimes, but I think on this map it's worth it less than it is on many maps, simply because there are no properties to fight for there. Anyway, if he wants to take a big risky move like going for an HQ capture, he should do that at this point. With that in mind, I'll try to have more units in the vicinity of my HQ from now on, just to make sure he can't do anything. While I'm there, I'll go for the capture on that property that he's been trying to get since turn 8 or whatever it was. Over on the left side, I can massacre his capturing infantry, putting him quite behind on unit count at long last. And he won't be able to wall for his vehicles next turn. And I'll send a tank on kind of a suicide scouting mission to reveal his rocket and see what else he has, and it reveals a lot of useful information for me. I can now prepare to counter both his enemy tanks and threaten his rocket. He can either move the rocket away, wasting its turn, or if he has it stay put, I know exactly where it is, and he also has to have something else come in to kill that tank of mine, which will be left vulnerable to my reinforcements. I do think I went overboard on recons and artillery this game, probably. I built the recon to replace the one that might well die in the left right now. My heavy tanks will need some vision provided for them. I also had a notion that if my opponent doesn't resign, I might want artillery of my own to take out his black boat efficiently and then just go for his HQ. Maybe I should have built tanks or saved my money and built a bomber next turn or something like that. So it's his turn. He gets some good rocket strikes for the first time in a while, and his rockets are safe for now, but last turn he walled with infantry and he lost all of those. This turn he's walling with injured tanks, and he's going to lose all of those. On the right side he reveals his new copter. As I hoped, it's going to die again. I would say that I generally got a lot better use out of my copters this game than Mr. Moo Moo did. His copters mostly just attacked infantry once each and then immediately died. One got a hit on the tank. I do take that to be further evidence for my interpretation that this map is really just not a very favorable one to air units. It's just not easy to have them attack from surprising places where your opponent doesn't already have a counter waiting for them. Speaking of counters, the anti-air from the right side is now showing up on the left side, so that's a good thing to have done with it. It's too late, but it is a good idea. It's obviously not enough to just have anti-airs, you need to keep them alive and have them in the right place to be useful. And on this map, the right spot to have your anti-airs is definitely closer to the left side. For player 2, that is. We both have tons and tons of injured guys. To be expected with 2 global damage seals fighting each other, of course. It just kind of irritates me a little bit to have so many units not at full HP, though. Another thing that bugs me a bit is just how enormously high the capture limits are in Advanced Wars by Web games before you actually just win the map. At 26 to 17, the game is over. But that's not enough. I have to get it up to 28 to 15 before the map will just mercifully end. And I think you can see that most of the remaining properties are pretty much right next to his bases, so not easy to take even with a commanding lead. I do go ahead and threaten a capture on his port at the very least. That might be possible to go for if I can just block off that shoal that leads to it. On the right side here, I continue to get just great exchanges, mopping up his cop and other units. I do get too greedy though, I think, at this point, and extend one of my tanks a little bit too far away from my artillery coverage. And of course, he does finally have a medium tank there, so I am left exposed to that. A bit of a setback, but it won't really matter. This will be a glorious turn on the left front. I'm going to set up to threaten another capture over there. Hopefully I can get one of these and get one step closer to actually finishing the game. Not going to be easy though. I think I can see that he can stop me pretty easily with just infantry for a while. I might also just go for the HQ if I see an opportunity, so my artillery is here to help out with that. and my T-Copter is too. It could be a useful blocker or just help bring in more infantry when they're needed. Currently there's a surplus of infantry on the right and a shortage on the left, so the T-Copter is a great way to fix that. So with my Neotank I get the exact engagement that you always hope for, just driving up, blasting away an enemy tank with no consequences, because now he can't see me anymore in that forest. I try to get multiple threats of places I could break through to get to his rocket. I know of course that he can kill that copter, but if he does so, he's going to have his anti-air exposed where it can easily be instant killed, and it's not going to form much of a useful wall between me and his rocket. I'll get another decisive first strike on his other MD tank, and to build myself another Neotank. I know he can Winter Fury me now, of course. I thought about saving my money, but I also thought it really doesn't matter. Maybe this will get me the win a turn faster if I just build the thing now. I can land or drop it right into the middle, and then fight his MD tank that I can see on the right side, maybe. Anyway, of course he does his Winter Fury, and then he goes ahead and resigns. So, I would say that was a pretty good game, and one of my closer and tougher ones. Not surprising that it was close, given that we were both playing as Olaf. I would say Mr. Mumu played quite well and made fewer mistakes than I would say most of my opponents have made. However, I think there were a couple of things that gave me an advantage in the end, and helped me overcome his player 2 advantages. Number 1, I correctly predicted what his opening would be and made a counter for that. Number 2, I think my analysis of this map and how one could use artillery on it was pretty good for a new map. I think I was also more correct in when and where I build air units and anti-air units. I also got a lot more value out of my lander than he did, which really helped me have both a good economy and a good military presence in the early turns, and reinforce faster in the middle turns too. And with the exception of that one misclick and just before superpower, I think my formations were generally pretty good and made good use of what units I had on hand, and what possible threats he might have out in the fog. Whereas I think Mr. Mumu was relying too much on just hanging far back and playing defense all the time to avoid having bad things happen, instead of having formations like I did that mostly minimized the damage I could take. I think you can see in these stats that it wasn't really superior income that won me the game. I did pull ahead in income at the end, of course, but it was more that I was able to use better unit combat outcomes to get myself a decisive income lead, rather than the income lead giving me superior matchups to begin with and me snowballing from there. I think one other lesson from this match is that, although of course I believe unit count is very important, it's not the only thing that matters. Sometimes it is worth it to sacrifice a unit or two to deny your opponent some income. And I think this becomes more true the bigger and slower the map is. The more units everyone has, the less it matters to be down by 1 or 2. And the longer the match goes, the more it matters that you're ahead by 1 or 2 properties. Anyway, I thought that was a pretty good game. Not sure when I'll play my next one. I guess it depends on when they have better maps in the Global League pool. It's been months since I played this one. Until then, have a great day, everyone.